There was a time in history when silence was more dangerous than noise. A time when nations did not trust treaties, did not trust words, and certainly did not trust each other. This was the Cold War. A war without constant gunfire, but full of invisible battles. Battles of information, battles of speed, battles of who could see first and strike later, above cities, above borders, above the reach of ordinary aircraft. A new battlefield was forming. The Sky.in 1945. The world was broken. Cities burned. Millions were dead. And two new superpowers emerged from the ashes. The United States and the Soviet Union. They were allies once, briefly, but now they were rivals. Both believed the same terrifying thing. If we don't know what the enemy is doing, we may already be too late. Nuclear weapons had changed everything. Wars were no longer about armies marching. They were about preparation, detection, and timing. Whoever struck first might strike last. In the early Cold War years, intelligence was everything. You needed to know where enemy bombers were based, where nuclear missiles were stored, how fast the enemy could react. But there was a problem. Spies could be captured, photographs could be outdated, and satellites did not yet exist in a reliable form. So the only way to see the enemy clearly was to fly over them. That idea alone was dangerous. Flying into hostile airspace meant one thing. You might not come back. In the 1950s, the United States relied on the U-2 spy plane. It flew high, higher than most fighters at the time. For a while it worked. American pilots crossed Soviet airspace, taking photos of missile bases, factories, and airfields. Washington believed the U-2 was safe. They were wrong. On May 1, 1960, a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union. The pilot survived. He was captured, and the mission was exposed to the entire world. The state Route 71 did not survive Mach 3 because of one miracle technology. It survived because everything worked together. Metal, fuel, engines, computers, humans. Every aircraft, no matter how advanced, eventually faces the same test. Not in laboratories, not in simulations, but in the real sky, against real enemies, with real weapons. For the state Route 71 Blackbird, that test came again and again. Radar alarms screaming. Missile launches confirmed. Interceptors climbing desperately below. And every time, the outcome was the same. The enemy could see it, but they could not touch it. The myth of the invincible aircraft. No aircraft is truly invincible. The state Route 71 was not immune to physics. Could be detected, could be tracked briefly. But combat is not about what you can see. It is about what you can reach. And that is where the Blackbird rewrote the rules. How air defense really works. To understand why the state Route 71 survived, we must understand air defense. An air defense system needs four things: detection, tracking, interception, kill. Fail at any step, and the target survives. Against the Blackbird, every system failed at least one step, often all four. Detection. Seeing the Blackbird, Soviet radar systems could detect the state Route 71. This is important. The Blackbird was not invisible. The size, speed, and altitude made radar returns noticeable. But detection alone is useless. Seeing a threat does not stop it. Tracking, the first failure. Tracking requires consistent radar lock. At Mach 3+, the state Route 71 crossed radar coverage in seconds. Tracking radars struggled to update fast enough. Doppler effects complicated velocity measurement. The faster the aircraft, the less time radar had to react. Targets blurred. Predictions failed. By the time a firing solution formed, the Blackbird was already somewhere else. Missile guidance versus reality. Missiles of the Cold War era were impressive but limited. They were designed for bombes. Why radar struggled? The state Route 71 was not a stealth aircraft in the modern sense, but its shape mattered. sharp edges, chins along the fuselage, angled surfaces. These reduced radar reflection. Long before stealth became mainstream, combined with speed and altitude, tracking became nearly impossible. Radar could see it, but it couldn't hold it. Life support at the edge of space. At 85,000 feet, blood boils without pressure. Oxygen cannot sustain consciousness. Temperature outside is lethal. The State Route 71 cockpit was a survival capsule. Pilots wore full-pressure suits. Oxygen systems were redundant. Temperature was carefully controlled. If cabin pressure failed, the pilot had seconds, not minutes. This was not flying. It was surviving space-like conditions. Inside a metal sphere. Training for the impossible. State Route 71 pilots were among the most elite aviators ever trained. They learned high-altitude physiology, pressure suit operation, emergency ejection at extreme speed, complex systems management. Most fighter pilots never qualified. The Blackbird demanded perfection. Maintenance. The invisible hero. For every hour the State Route 71 flew, it required dozens of hours of maintenance. Technicians inspected heat damage, expansion stress, fuel systems, titanium fatigue. The aircraft was pushed to its limits. Every single mission, maintenance crews were as critical as pilots. Without them, the legend would never leave the ground. Y&01 built another one. You might ask, why didn't anyone build a better State Route 71? Because it was incredibly expensive, logistically complex, politically sensitive. It was a machine built for a specific moment in history, a moment when information was worth any cost. When engines stopped being engines. At extreme speed, most of the thrust did not come from the engine core. It came from the inlet system. Massive spike cones at the front of each engine moved automatically, precisely controlling shockwaves. These shockwaves compressed incoming air before it ever reached the engine. By cruise speed, over 80% of thrust came from the inlet. The engine core acted more like a stabilizer. The State Route 71 was closer to a controlled explosion than an airplane. Unstart. The most terrifying failure, the most dangerous event in State Route 71 flight, was called an unstart. If shockwaves lost alignment, one engine would suddenly lose thrust. The aircraft would violently yaw. The plane could roll uncontrollably. At Mach 3, this happened in fractions of a second. Pilots described unstarts as being hit by a truck at 80,000 feet. The aircraft systems had to detect, correct, and recover instantly. There was no time for human reaction. Flying a computer before computers. The State Route 71 relied heavily on automation. Decades before fly-by-wire became common, computers managed inlet spikes, fuel distribution, pressure balance, stability. Without these systems, no human pilot could survive Mach 3 flight. The Blackbird was one of the earliest examples of man and machine truly flying together. The black paint was not cosmetic. The Blackbird's iconic black color was not chosen for intimidation. It was chosen for heat management. Special iron ferrite paint radiated heat efficiently, reduced infrared signature, protected the skin. Even the color served survival. Nothing on the State Route 71 was decorative. The irony of the Cold War. Here is the irony few people know. The largest source of titanium in the world was the Soviet Union. America needed titanium to spy on the Soviets, so the United States quietly purchased titanium through third-party companies, shell corporations, and international suppliers. The enemy unknowingly supplied the metal for the aircraft that would violate their airspace for decades. History doesn't get more ironic than that. A plane that expanded in flight. At Mach 3, heat changes everything. The State Route 71 didn't just get hot. It grew. The fuselage expanded several inches in length. Panels shifted. Seams closed. On the ground, the aircraft leaked fuel constantly. Not because of bad engineering, but because the fuel tanks were designed to seal only when the aircraft was fully heated in flight. The Blackbird was not meant to be comfortable on the ground. It was meant to be perfect in the sky. Fuel as a cooling system. Fuel in the State Route 71 wasn't just fuel. It was a coolant. Before being burned in the engines, fuel circulated through wing edges, engine nacelles, heat-critical systems. It absorbed massive amounts of heat before being injected into combustion. Without this system, the aircraft would have overheated within minutes. The Blackbird literally drank its own heat to stay alive. The most unusual engines ever built, the engines of the State Route 71, were not normal jet engines. They were Pratt & Whitney J58S, engines that behaved like hybrids, part turbojet, part ramjet, part rocket. At low speed, they functioned like conventional jets. At Mach 3, they became something else entirely, opening the edge of what should fail. Every aircraft ever built has a limit, a speed where metal bends, a height where engines starve, a temperature where structure gives up. The State Route 71 Blackbird was designed to live beyond those limits. It didn't flirt with failure. It operated inside it. Every single mission. To understand how the Blackbird survived, we must understand one truth. At Mach 3, physics becomes the enemy. And the State Route 71 was built to fight physics itself. Mach 3 is not just fast. Mach 3 is not simply 3 times the speed of sound. At that speed, air behaves like a solid. Shockwaves become walls. Heat becomes destructive. At sea level, Mach 3 would tear an aircraft apart. Even at high altitude, the friction alone can melt aluminum in minutes. Most jets aren't defeated by enemies. They're defeated by temperature. Why aluminum was useless. Traditional aircraft are built from aluminum alloys. They are light, strong, easy to work with, but aluminum has a problem. At around 150 degrees Celsius, it begins to lose strength. At Mach 3, surface temperatures exceed 500 degrees Celsius. Aluminum wouldn't bend. It would fail catastrophically. So the State Route 71 needed a different skin, a different skeleton, a different philosophy. Titanium, the metal that saved the Blackbird. Titanium became the answer. It is stronger than steel by weight, resistant to extreme heat, corrosion resistant. But titanium was also rare, expensive, extremely difficult to machine. In the 1960s, the United States barely knew how to work with it. Tools broke, welds cracked, entire sections had to be redesigned. Yet there was no alternative. Over 85% of the State Route 71 was made from titanium alloys. It was the first aircraft to rely on it so completely. The cost of going too fast. Nothing about the State Route 71 was easy. Titanium was rare, hard to machine, hard to weld. The United States didn't have enough of it. So secretly, they bought titanium from foreign suppliers, including companies linked to the Soviet Union itself. The enemy helped build the aircraft that would spy on them. History is full of irony. A plane that leaked on purpose. On the ground, the State Route 71 leaked fuel. Not because it was poorly built, but because it was designed to expand in flight. At Mach 3, the aircraft grew several inches longer. Gaps sealed. Fuel tanks closed. It was a machine that only worked properly once it was flying faster than sound. The pilot problem. Flying this aircraft was unlike anything before. At altitude, a loss of pressure meant death in seconds. Oxygen was critical. Temperatures were extreme. Pilots wore pressure suits, similar to astronauts. They trained for months just to survive the environment. The State Route 71 didn't forgive mistakes. Why fear built the Blackbird? The State Route 71 was not built for pride. It was built for fear. Fear of surprise attacks. Fear of nuclear war. Fear of being blind. Every bolt, every rivet, every system was shaped by one thought. We must know before it's too late. The birth of a legend. When the State Route 71 finally flew, it changed the balance of power. Enemy radars could see it, but not stop it. Missiles chased it, but failed. Pilots tried to reach it, but ran out of sky. And slowly, a reputation formed. A reputation built not on myths, but on repeated failure of everyone who tried to stop it. The State Route 71 was born from fear. But fear alone does not create legends. Engineering does, sacrifice does, and decisions that push technology beyond its limits. Speed as armor. Traditional aircraft survived by maneuvering.
Fighter dodged missile.
Bombers relied on escorts. But this new aircraft would not dodge. It would outrun. At extreme speed, missiles lose energy. Interceptors run out of fuel. Radar tracking becomes unstable. The faster you go, the less time the enemy has to react. Speed became armor. Altitude as invisibility. Altitude was the second key. The higher an aircraft flies, the thinner the air, the harder it is to climb, the weaker enemy engines become. Most fighters simply couldn't operate at extreme altitude. Even if they tried, they would arrive slow, unstable, and nearly out of fuel. The new aircraft would live where others could not. The A-12, the first step toward legend. The first result of this thinking was the A-12. It was faster than Mach 3, built almost entirely from titanium, designed for the CIA, not the Air Force. The A-12 proved something critical. Extreme speed plus extreme altitude equals survival. Missiles were launched at it. Interceptors tried to climb toward it. None succeeded. But the A-12 was only the beginning. Why the Air Force wanted more. The U.S. Air Force watched closely. They saw potential beyond reconnaissance. They wanted longer range, more sensors, a two-seat configuration. They wanted a machine that could see everything and still come home. That machine would become the SR-71. A shape never seen before. When engineers began designing the State Route 71, they threw away conventional ideas. The shape was long, sharp, almost alien. Every curve served a purpose: to reduce drag, to manage heat, to control shock waves. Even the black paint was not cosmetic. It helped radiate heat. This aircraft was not built to look good. It was built to survive hell. Information as a weapon. Every time a missile was launched, the Blackbird recorded radar frequencies, tracking patterns, response times. The aircraft didn't just survive. It learned. Each mission made future missions safer. Why no engagement ever succeeded? No single reason explains State Route 71 survival. It was the combination: speed that erased reaction time, altitude that weakened enemies, engineering that survived heat, pilots trained to trust acceleration. Remove one factor, and the story changes. Together, they were unstoppable. A plane that made defense obsolete. The State Route 71 didn't defeat air defense systems. It made them irrelevant. It exposed a harsh truth. Defense only works when the attacker plays by your rules. The Blackbird never did. By now, one fact is clear. The State Route 71 was not lucky. It was inevitable. In part for, we will move deeper into enemy territory. Soviet command centers, missile crews, pilot accounts, and the silent panic caused by an aircraft that could not be stopped. Pilots at the edge of death. MiG-25 pilots pushed their aircraft beyond safe limits. Some damaged engines permanently. Some nearly lost control. They weren't cowards. They were chasing something that physics refused to allow. And every failed attempt reinforced the same truth. The State Route 71 lived in a different world. We can't even get close. This phrase didn't come from propaganda. Came from real frustration. Radar operators watched the Blackbird pass overhead. Interceptor pilots climbed until engines screamed. Missile crews launched weapon after weapon. Nothing worked. The aircraft was already gone. Numbers that tell the story. Over its operational life, more than 4,000 missiles were launched at the State Route 71. 0 successful hits.
Zéro combat l'os.
Not because enemies didn't try, but because the design denied them success. Y-turning was never required. Fighter pilots are trained to evade. The State Route 71 didn't evade. When a missile launch was detected, the response was simple: accelerate. At Mach 3+, missiles could not close distance. Acceleration increased separation. Speed was not escape. Speed was dominance. Altitude as a shield. Altitude multiplied speed's advantage. At lower altitude, missiles maneuver better. Fighters have more control. At extreme altitude, everything struggles. The Blackbird chose the battlefield. Where enemies were weakest, that was intentional. The psychological war. Air defense isn't just physical. It's psychological. Repeated failure damages confidence. Soviet forces learned. Launching was pointless. Interception was unlikely. Resources were wasted. Yet they still tried. Because allowing an enemy to fly unchallenged was unacceptable. The State Route 71 forced them to react. And reacting meant revealing defenses.
Slower reconnaissance planes.
Predictable flight paths. The State Route 71 was none of those. At extreme altitude, air density is low. Control surfaces lose effectiveness. Missiles bleed energy rapidly. Even a fast missile becomes slow in thin air. Y missiles ran out of energy. Missiles need air to maneuver. At 80,000 feet, lift is minimal. Turning costs enormous energy. Climbing further is nearly impossible. Missiles launched upward. Lost speed almost immediately. They reached impressive heights, then fell back. Never close enough to explode effectively. The speed problem. Speed killed interception attempts. To intercept the State Route 71, a missile or aircraft needed to climb rapidly, accelerate fast enough, predict future position. The Blackbird's speed made prediction useless. By the time interceptors reached altitude, the State Route 71 had already passed. It wasn't a chase. It was a missed appointment. The MiG-25, built to kill the Blackbird. The Soviet response was aggressive. They built an aircraft specifically to counter high-altitude threats. Its name, MiG-25 Foxbat. On paper, Mach 3 capable. Extreme climb rate. Heavy missile payload. It looked like the answer. It wasn't. The problem with the MiG-25. The MiG-25 could reach Mach 3. But only briefly. Engines overheated. Fuel consumption was massive. Control became unstable. To reach the State Route 71, MiG-25 pilots had to take off early, climb perfectly, be in exactly the right place. Even then, they were usually too low and too slow.